The movie starts with a character named Lee Juk-Yo, a respected national poet who is in his 70s. He lives alone in an isolated house. He is a lonely old man, so he reads books to help him with his loneliness. Basically, he buries himself in books. On the other side, his assistant, Seo Jae-woo, has recently published his first novel, described as a genre novel with psychological insight. On one casual day, Lee Juk-Yo and Seo Jae-woo were returning from Jae-woo's book press meet. They find a stranger asleep on Juk-Yo's porch. A 17-year-old high school girl named Yoon Jae-yo is looking for a part-time job, while Jae-woo is interrogating her, and Juk-Yo is mesmerized by her beauty. I know what you guys are thinking, it's not another pedophile story. So don't judge a book by its cover, and watch it all the way through. Coming back to the story later that day, while Juk-Yo and Jae-woo are celebrating the success of Jae-woo's first novel with a small party in Juk-Yo's house, Jae-woo reveals that he is not going to be around for some time, so he has arranged for someone to look after him, and that person is Yoon Jae-yo. The next day, Yoon Jae-yo comes to work at Juk-Yo's house, and they didn't seem to get along with each other. But as the days passed, they slowly got closer day by day, and the relationship between Yoon Jae-yo and Juk-yo started to grow. Juk-yo starts to develop feelings for her. The 17-year-old girl who helps him rediscover himself makes him feel alive for the first time in a long time. He feels love and lust, the senses that have been lost for so many years. At the same time, the girl tries to impress Juk-yo by trimming her skirt so short. Yoon Jae-yo began to develop feelings for him. On the other hand, Jae-woo, who is now a best-selling author, is enjoying his fan meetups and newfound celebrity. On one rainy night, while Juk-yo was sleeping, he heard someone knocking on the door and found Yoon Jae-yo standing completely drenched in the rain. Juk-yo lets her in. While she was cleaning up the mess, Juk-yo noticed something on her cheek. It was a bruise caused by her abusive mother. So Yoon Jae-yo decides to spend the night at Juk-yo's house. Juk-yo gives her his shirt and dries her school uniform. Juk-yo shows her an extra bed, and he goes back to sleep. In the morning, Juk-yo feels that something is wrapped around his waist, and later he finds out that it was Yoon Jae-yo. While he is thinking about how she got there, he notices a tattoo on her chest. Juk-yo hears Jae-woo's car approaching, and immediately he gets up and runs away from his bedroom to his study room. To avoid any misunderstanding, Jae-woo comes into the house. Jae-woo sees a girl's school uniform hung in the closet, and suddenly, Yoon Jae-yo comes out of Juk-yo's room. Jae-woo was shocked when he saw Yoon Jae-yo in his bedroom. Jae-woo asks her about her clothes, and his confusion is now at its peak. Yoon Jae-yo prepares breakfast for the two, and Jae-woo tells her that Juk-yo doesn't eat bread. But she does not listen to him. She gives the food to Juk-yo and asks him to eat it. Juk-yo happily eats it. While they were getting ready to go out, Juk-yo asked Yoon-yo about her tattoo on her chest, and she told him it was just henna. Jae-woo follows Yoon Jae-yo outside and asks her to stop coming to the house. Yoon Jae-yo tells him that Juk-yo gave her the gate keys. Yoon Jae-yo sits on a rock and looks at herself in a mirror. Jae-woo pushes Yoon Jae-yo, and she drops her mirror. Yoon Jae-yo started crying and saying that it was her first gift from her mother for her birthday. Juk-yo observes the chaos and descends the cliff, picking up the mirror, which he returns to her, making her embrace him tightly while Jae-woo is watching. Later that afternoon, Yoon Jae-yo runs to Juk-yo's home to tell him that she'll give him henna. Though he tries to refuse at first, he gives in to Yoon Jae-yo's persuasions, and the two head inside his house. Juk-yo nervously lies on Yoon-go's lap as she starts putting the henna on him. When she tells him to close his eyes, Juk-yo soon starts zoning out and imagining himself with Yoon Jae-yo. In his imagination, he is moving closer to her, gently hugs her from behind her back, but she runs away. Standing up, Juk-yo stares at his reflection from the window and is stunned to see a younger version of himself. He can't believe himself, and then he runs after Yoon Jae-yo, smiling while chasing after her. The two then head back to the house slowly. They are getting into an intimate moment, smiling the whole time. Unfortunately, his dream comes to an end when Yoon Jae-yo wakes him up excitedly to show him his new tattoo. Later, Lee is in his study room, passionately writing a poem about Yoon Jae-yo, as he imagines the two of them together. Jae-woo tried to write a poem at home, but he ended up deleting it. He then calls Yoon Jae-yo, asking her to buy him some medicine. But when she arrives, Jae-woo starts screaming at her, demanding to know what she's doing to Juk-yo, and telling her that he is a noble person. Confused and angry, Yoon Jae-yo asks him what she did wrong, Before cursing him and snapping at him to screw off, insulted Jae-woo grabs Yoon-jae, pulling at her blouse, and blames her mirror for the way Juk-Yo had risked himself just to get her to stop crying. When he demands to know what's so special about it, Jae-woo stresses that it was a gift from her mother, and Jae-woo rudely asks if she thinks it's filled with her love. Though he's still furious, he notices blood coming from Yoon-jae's chest. This calms him down, and he goes to get some napkins for her. Yoon-jae mentions that she forgot that Jae-woo was an engineering major who took 10 years to realize that not all stars are the same. Jae-woo was surprised by her, and he recalls the day he met Juk-Yo in his class during his discussion about stars. She also claims that he told her about the time Juk-Yo went to prison and learned how to fix cars. Then Yoon-jae borrows a book from him, a book called The Heart, written by Jae-woo. The next day, while Yoon-jae is cleaning the study room, Jae-woo walks in and notices her cleaning. Jae-woo then asks her if she read the book. Yoon-jae says that she hasn't because she's busy with her exam, so she couldn't read it. When Yoon-jae starts moving Juk-Yo's table, Jae-woo quickly stops her, but she insists on moving it and mentions that Juk-Yo has been writing. Jae-woo stops her and tells her that it has been there for a long time, but Yoon-yo tries to move it, and as a result, they both push each other off, knocking the table over. Yoon-yo escapes from him and rushes to tell this to Juk-Yo. In the room, Jae-woo finds Juk-Yo's poem for Yoon-jae. When Yoon-jae and Juk-Yo arrive in the room, Juk-Yo tells Yoon-jae to let the table be there and express his feelings about it. Yoon-jae was disappointed. Jae-woo then gives Juk-Yo his schedule, mentioning that he is going to a restaurant to meet with the literary museum officials on Monday. Yoon-jae asks Juk-Yo if she can come with him. Jae-woo does not want her to accompany him. He objects, but Juk-Yo allows her to accompany him. Yoon-jae declares that she read The Heart. They talk about Jae-woo's book for a while. On Monday, Juk-Yo finished the dinner with the literary museum official. Juk-Yo gets up to leave. Officials ask him, "Why are you hurrying?" Juk-Yo answers by showing the henna. Yoon-jae drew on him and then left the place. At the bus stop, Juk-Yo picks up Yoon-jae, and they then drive off to a restaurant to eat. The two joke around and enjoy their time together. Meanwhile, Jae-woo was in his study room reading the poem Juk-Yo wrote for Yoon-jae. After reading it, he leans back and sighs heavily as he closes his eyes. Then he returns the poem to Juk-Yo's table, gently closing it before he opens it again. Jae-woo angrily stares at Yoon-jae's name again. He takes it and slams it shut. Later that night, Juk-Yo was working on his car when Mr. Park suddenly arrived. He tells him about naming the museum and displaying Juk-Yo's manuscript there. Juk-Yo agrees to this before he and Mr. Park talk about Jae-woo's success as a writer. Mr. Park then tells him about Jae-woo's latest short story. When Juk-Yo asks what the title is, he tells him that it's Yoon-jae. Juk-Yo was shocked after hearing this, and immediately he rushed to his study room and looked for his poem about Yoon-jae. When he finds it on his table, Juk-Yo drives to a bookstore, where he finds Jae-woo's short story. He holds the book as he stares at it in shock. Next day, Jae-woo meets Juk-Yo in his house. Inside, Jae-woo makes a cup of tea for Lee, but he refuses it, saying that Jae-woo might have poisoned it, and he leaves the place. Jae-woo then notices his short story book on Juk-Yo's table. Juk-Yo then confronts Jae-woo about what he did. Jae-woo tries to reason that he couldn't just let Juk-Yo's poem waste away at his table. He had to let the world know about it. Juk-Yo then gets angry and calls Jae-woo a thief. But Jae-woo retorts that Juk-Yo was the one who made him the way he is. When Juk-Yo secretly agrees to ghostwrite The Heart for him, then you'll be sorry when it becomes a bestseller. In retaliation, Juk-Yo claims that he considered it Jae-woo's salary. "You may have no talent, but you kept me company, so I wrote it for you as a gift," Juk-Yo said. Now, Jae-woo is going on a tirade about how he doesn't know who he is anymore, if it's himself or Juk-Yo's mask. Juk-Yo tries to stop him, but Jae-woo remains deep in his emotions. Then Jae-woo tells Juk-Yo that he can't publish it, because his relationship with Yoon-jae would be scandalous. Finally, Juk-Yo bursts out in anger, grabbing Jae-woo and berating him over how worthless he is, calling him a thief. Juk-Yo then hits him in the head with his slippers, threatening him continuously and cursing at him. Yoon-jae runs away after seeing that. Juk-Yo was broken inside. Later that night, Yoon-jae returns to Juk-Yo's house. She tries to enter through the front door, but it's locked. Juk-Yo won't let her in. She begs for him to open, but he doesn't. She then finds Jae-woo's book on the table and leaves with it. The next day, Yoon Jae-yo met Jae-woo at his house. Jae-woo asks Yoon Jae-yo if she has read it, but she only scolds him for stealing the story. Jae-woo apologizes for that, and Yoon Jae-yo asks how he found out about Juk-Yo's henna. He tells her that he told him about it. Yoon-yo isn't satisfied, scolding him again for now keeping secrets with Juk-Yo. Jae-woo then tells her that Lee is a father figure to him, and that he trusts him with everything. After this, the two go to Seo's car and continue to talk. Suddenly, Jae-woo starts kissing her, but when she asks him why he's doing this, he stops, and Jae-woo then admits that he is lonely and pulls away, leaning back in his seat. Disgusted, Yoon Jae-yo looks at him before leaving the car to head home. After that, Jae-woo meets Mr. Park at the restaurant, and they are waiting for the announcement of the annual literary award winner. Mr. Park's phone started ringing while they were talking, and he answered it with joy, telling Jae-woo that he had won the award for his story on Yoon Jae-yo. Jae-woo doesn't believe it first, and he eventually smiles, still in disbelief. The next day, Jae-woo is waiting for the award ceremony to begin, and Mr. Park informs him that Juk-Yo is here to attend the ceremony. After Jae-woo receives the award, they call Juk-Yo to the stage for a speech about Jae-woo's award. In his congratulatory speech, he says that just as your youth is not a prize for your efforts, my old age is not a punishment for my faults. He then proceeds to describe the short story Yoon Jae-yo, while reminiscing about Yoon Jae-yo. Later, while Juk-Yo is cutting some seaweed strips, Yoon Jae-yo suddenly arrives and wishes him a happy birthday. She even bought him a cake and a present. Though Juk-Yo is just staring at her sadly through the window, Yoon Jae-yo tells him that his windows are dirty. She then notices that Juk-Yo is unhappy to see her, but he tells her that he is glad she came. After he opens the door for her, she happily walks in. Later, while Juk-Yo is outside cooking and Yoon Jae-yo is preparing his cake, Yoon Jae-yo notices Jae-woo. Jae-woo comes and greets Juk-Yo and gives him a gift. Before he leaves, Juk-Yo asks him to join them for dinner. Inside, two sit awkwardly together, while Yoon Jae-yo prepares the food. When she arrives, she then asks Juk-Yo about the history of wine, and Juk-Yo answers her. Jae-woo asks why she doesn't ask him any questions, but Yoon Jae-yo laughs it off, telling him that he doesn't have good answers, and that he's too loose like all engineering majors are. Then Jae-woo gets drunk and starts bragging about his success, saying that he is no longer a follower but a respected writer. Juk-Yo leaves the room. Yoon Jae-yo follows him. Before leaving, Juk-Yo hugs her. Then Yoon Jae-yo kisses him on the forehead, and he goes to sleep. However, Yoon Jae-yo walks back inside and sneaks into Juk-Yo's study room. In the middle of the night, Juk-Yo gets up and goes down to the basement, seeing Yoon Jae-yo's shoes. Then he goes to his study room, where he finds Yoon Jae-yo and Jae-woo laughing with each other. He then moves outside to spy on them from a window and catches a glimpse of them kissing. And then he finds another window where he can clearly see what is happening. He grabs a ladder and puts it under the window, and after climbing up, Juk-Yo is in disbelief when he sees Yoon Jae-yo and Jae-woo hooking up. With this shock, Juk-Yo climbs down from the ladder, leaving the two to finish with their business. Lee then sits in his car, saddened by what he has just witnessed. He waits for Yoon Jae-yo to leave, and then he slashes Jae-woo's tire and works in his car. The next day, Jae-woo rushes to his car and finds that one of his tires is flat. He then borrows Juk-Yo's truck, making Lee jump from the bed when he hears the engine start. On the road, Jae-woo is driving, and then he suddenly loses control of the steering wheel, making the truck crash. After that, he heads to the mechanic to have it fixed. In the repair shop, the mechanic tells him that the steering has been intentionally loosened, and Jae-woo thinks that whoever did it had intent to kill him. With a look of realization on his face, he drives angrily back to Juk-Yo's house, while Juk-Yo burns his writings. As Jae-woo drives angrily back to Juk-Yo's house, angry that Juk-Yo was attempting to kill him, he gets into another accident. This time he falls off a cliff. Juk-Yo calls Yoon Jae-yo, telling her that he killed Jae-woo. When she is coming from the school, she watches the police take out Jae-woo's car, which is all smashed. After some time, Yoon Jae-yo goes to the library and picks up Jae-woo's book. She reads it again and realizes something later. Yoon Jae-yo goes to see Juk-Yo. She finds him asleep. Not moving, his place was smelling like liquor. Yoon Jae-yo starts talking to him, stammering at first. She lies down next to him, telling him that some things can never be felt, no matter how hard you try, and that a third person can never describe how they felt at that moment, just as an engineer who thinks all stars are the same can never write something as beautiful as Yoon Jae-yo. She cries and leaves a bouquet for him, thanking him for making her so beautiful in the story, and she leaves. After Yoon Jae-yo closes the door, Juk-Yo's eyes are filled with tears as he bids Yoon Jae-yo goodbye for the final time.